Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to John Carroll. It's great to have you all with us again. My name is Ed Hannenberg, and I am the Green Chair in Catholic Theology in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies here at John Carroll University. And this is John Carroll's third annual Theology for Teachers workshop. It's an initiative that really reflects our commitment as a university to respond to a real desire among teachers for opportunities to come together and have meaningful conversations about teaching. Conversations that are both theologically substantive and practically relevant. And the last 2 years have been a great success. It's why we're back here this year, and we've continued to grow. So we've got a larger group than either of the previous 2 years. We have 97 teachers here with us today, registered from 35 different Catholic high schools, from 9 different dioceses, including Cleveland, Youngstown, Toledo, Columbus, Cincinnati, Erie, Pittsburgh, Greensburg, and Buffalo. Did I miss anybody? I think that's 12 of those schools are here for the first time. 45 teachers are participating for the first time, so welcome. 52 are returning customers, so welcome back. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. To yourselves for being here, to your colleagues, to your schools for supporting this. It's just really great. This is my favorite thing I do all year, and so thanks for making it special. At the heart of this day is what I believe to be a common sense of mission between the university and the schools. At a quite practical level, I'd like to make this point before. John Carroll alums are out there teaching in Catholic high schools in the Diocese of Cleveland and beyond, and more than 15% of John Carroll's freshman class come from the high schools represented in this room. So we're helping to form your teachers, you're helping to form our students, and what we're all trying to do, I think, is to draw young people into a rich and robust tradition that has the potential to transform their lives and inspire them to transform the world in the light of Christ. So let's begin this day with a prayer for our students. In your folders is a prayer card, white half sheet, and I thought maybe this year we would try doing this in choir. And so everyone to my right, you'll be sort of stanza A versus A, and everyone to my, that's actually my left. My left, your right, and then everyone to my left, right, your left, over here, will be B. And we'll take turns praying this aloud together. So let us remember that we are always in loving presence of God. And I invite side A to pray with me. Prayer for our students. May you know the friendship of God, and may you know yourself in that friendship. May all your anxieties and fears, all your insecurities and inner doubts fade in the confidence of God's unconditional love. May your joy and enthusiasm, your life and your energy find its source and its goal in the good news of Christ. May your resistance and disinterest, your posturing and pretending be transformed through the power of the Spirit. May your dedication to study be fruitful. May your generosity in service be blessed. May you come to see your own unique role in building the reign of God. And may I come to see in you the presence of God, the face of Christ, and the gift of the Spirit. Amen. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin our keynote. In your folders, if you haven't found it already, there's a blue sheet that gives you a schedule for the day, including a list of the different breakout sessions and their room locations. So after the keynote, which will run until 10:30 this morning, you are to select one of 3 workshops. And the rooms, as I said, are listed on the schedule. To get to them, we'll all go down the long hallway that you came to this room, but instead of turning left and going down the ramp, don't do that, turn right and go down that hallway. All the rooms, the 3 breakout rooms are off that hallway. There are signs, and folks will be there to help you find where you're going. All of you who are returning members can help the newbies find their way around. Bathrooms are off of that hallway. There are also restrooms just on the other side of this wall. If you need, we now have coffee and water here in this room, but we don't have a drink service in the breakout room. So if you want something to drink or another cup of coffee, pick that up on your way out. We have a little bit of time before the breakouts begin at 10:45. At noon, when the workshops finish up, I invite you to come back to this room where lunch will be served buffet style. And I would ask that as you arrive, that you just go right ahead and get into line. That'll help keep things moving rather than sitting and waiting until everyone's assembled. We start, feel free to pick up your food as you arrive. Lunch will be mainly a chance for conversation, but I'll also take the opportunity to share a few exciting developments here at John Carroll that might be of interest to you and your colleagues. Throughout the day, Colleen Sommerfeld, the Assistant Dean of Graduate Studies, she's over by the door, will be available to answer any questions you may have about our various programs in theology and education, school counseling, educational leadership, and others. She's got a table display set up on my left. After lunch, the 3 morning workshops will be repeated. If you really loved this workshop you went to in the morning, feel free to go back in the afternoon. But you may also want to take that opportunity to choose a second one. At the end of that workshop in the afternoon, before leaving that workshop, I'll ask that you complete the orange evaluation form that's in your folder. Those have proven very helpful the last couple of years in continuing to improve this event and to think creatively about other ways to support your ministry. After that, you can come back here. The formal program it will be over, but we'll have a beer and wine reception, and you're welcome to stay as long as you like. Okay. Did I forget anything? Okay. It's particularly appropriate this morning to be focusing at the local level on the faith of young people, because at the international level, bishops, cardinals, Pope Francis, and other church leaders are gathered in Rome for the Synod on Young People, the Faith and Vocational Discernment. Our keynote speaker this morning knows young people. Before becoming the assistant professor of religious education at Loyola University, New Orleans, Dr. Tracey Lamont earned a Ph.D. in religion and religious education at Fordham University, where she began her research into how constructive developmental theory can help religious educators explore new ways to think about young adult moral development in a complex global society. Perhaps even more important than that scholarly expertise is the fact that before getting her Ph.D., Tracey worked for several years as a youth and young adult minister in the parish, as well as teaching religion, social studies, and epistemology in the high school classroom. She currently serves as a member of the U.S. Bishop's Young Adult Advisory Team and is a committee member for the National Dialogue on Young People, the Faith, and Vocational Discernment. So Dr. Lamont brings not only her scholarly expertise, but also practical classroom experience and a genuine pastoral sensitivity. Her topic this morning is moral development, meeting students where they are and accompanying them further. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tracey Lamont.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. Is the microphone on? Good, good, good. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I am thrilled to be with you all this morning. It's been years since I have been to Cleveland. I'm from upstate New York in Rochester, and this used to be part of my drive back and forth to college. So I didn't spend a lot of time in Cleveland, but I think I spent like one evening with friends here. So a lot's changed. There's a real cool hipster food scene I've heard, which is really neat. And I heard a rumor about what sounds like a New Orleans po' boy, like there's a Polish boy sandwich or something. And I was like, that's similar to the po' boy. And then I was like, oh no, it's not. But apparently visitors are supposed to have these things when they visit our cities. And so I was excited to know that there's some kind of sandwich called boy here. So, but in any case, so let me see this slide. Hang on a minute. Well, I've lost the mouse is what the issue is. Oh, there she is. All right, sorry about that, guys. So in any event, so Ed did an excellent job introducing me. Like he noted that I work at Loyola University, New Orleans, in what's called the Loyola Institute for Ministry. So we call that LIM as shorthand. And you know, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Ed did a very good job about that. But I was first called to ministry when I was at Fordham. You know, I was in the grad school of religion for my graduate degree at the time. And friends of mine were saying, you know, I was trying to figure out my vocation. I knew I'd be leaving in a year, and they said, just be a youth minister. We're youth ministers, you can do it. And I was like, what? All right, I can certainly try, you know. And so I did. Somebody hired me, which is astonishing. And so that was, I jumped in head first to that. And after first, you know, I was a young adult at the time, very green. And, you know, after a few bewildering and confusing weeks of not knowing what I was doing, I absolutely fell in love with working with high school age students and middle school at that time as well. And I learned, you know, the deep value that our young people bring to our lives and to our churches. And I learned that if you would just, you know, they can lead you and they can teach you so much if we just have the ears to hear them, you know. And so I fell in love with, so no matter if it was ministry or formal education, I fell in love with working with young people and young adults as well. And so that's what sort of brings me, you know, later on in life. I taught in elementary school for a little while after being a minister. Down in Florida, and then I moved into the high school level, back to working with high school teens. And now I have the absolute pleasure of teaching teachers who teach young people now, you know, and so I feel my life has kind of come a little bit full circle, and it's been very exciting. So my ministry and religious education are at the core of who I am, and so that's what makes me so very, very excited to be here with you all today, and truly honored to be with you. So, you know, your ministry and education with the young church, I believe, is one of the most crucial aspects of growing the church today. And so I applaud all of you for your hard work and your diligence and your passion for young people. So I'd love to start and get a sense of who everybody is, just kind of quickly if you want to. If you don't need to stand up, it's not late enough in the day where you have to do stand-up sessions. But you can raise your hand. You all know what those are. We used to do stand-up parties when it was like 7th period. All right, stop falling asleep after lunch, stand up. And so let's look at how many folks here for grade levels. Who teaches 9th grade? Show of hands. How about 10th grade? And 11th? Okay, 12th? How many of you teach more than one grade level? How many are campus ministers? How many are campus ministers and teachers? Okay. Now, how about how long we've been teaching? How many of you, this is your first year teaching? Oh, welcome, we love you. Yay, we love you. How many between like 2 and 5 years? How about 6 and 10 years? Okay, how about 11 to 15? More than 16? Whoa, all right. More than 20? 25? 30? We're gonna keep going. 35? Oh my goodness gracious, 40? Okay, we're gonna keep going. 45? Okay, how long? 42. I don't know. Good answer. Good answer. There's a Scantron bubble for that. Yeah. Between 40 and 45. Exactly. Wonderful. There was a couple other hands that I missed. Well, congratulations. Round of applause. Congratulations. Oh my gosh. That is amazing. So welcome, thank you again. It's good to get a sense of who's in the room. I'm gonna walk us through this morning sort of the way I naturally came about this topic and really started to enjoy delving into the moral and religious lives of young people. At LIM, Loyola Institute for Ministry, we offer a program in practical theology. And so we have our own sort of method in theological reflection. And as I looked back on my life, I realized I was doing this implicitly. And so now I can think about it more explicitly in my life. And so if anybody familiar with like See, Judge, Act, I'm sure, the theological reflection, pastoral circle, pastoral cycle, those kind of things. This is very, very similar to that, where we start going through kind of identifying a concern or a problem that we see in our lives, in our ministries, in our education, and things like that. And after that, you look at the concern, you kind of dissect it and you take it apart, and then you say, what's driving this? What is driving this concern? What are my assumptions? What do I think is the reason why this is happening? And so I'm going to start. Our concern this morning will be the topic. We'll talk about moral development, the issues of moral relativism, individualism, secularism, and things like that. And then we'll go into what we think is driving that, what we hear, in the narratives of driving that force in young people today. And then we go into testing, and testing is really very much like analysis. Like you're going to explore through several disciplines and talk to people. Talk to people in your ministries and your education and say, what is it that's driving this issue that I'm seeing. Looking at different disciplines, different contexts, and things like that. And then you make a decision. Kind of like See, Judge, Act, but really for our purposes, we spend a lot of time right here, just kind of like identifying what it is that your assumptions are so that you can come to a deeper understanding, to see if they're true, to see if they hold weight. If our assumptions are accurate. The amount of times I've assumed something was true and it was not, I don't have enough hands for that, And so I love this method because if you really devote yourself to it, you can come to a transformed understanding of what you thought was true. And that transformed understanding helps you address the problem far better than you ever could have had you not thought about it that way. And so I thought we might start there by looking at some of the challenges and the concerns regarding the moral and spiritual lives of young people today. And so there's a number of studies, podcasts, websites, lectures, leaders in our communities that talk about the religious and moral sensibilities of young people. And so we have, all the research that was out still going on about millennials, and now we have emerging research about the young people in your classrooms. And I think the iGen or Gen Z, what do we call them? iGen. I don't know if Gen Z is more common or iGen is. We're on the fence on that. So we'll go with iGen. Sounds good. Because Gen Y, Gen X, Gen Y became millennial over time, so we stopped calling them Gen Y. So I think the oldest ones are like 22 or 23. I think they're in college now. The oldest iGens are. So they're in your classroom right now. And the studies are emerging now of what we're seeing, with young people. And we're coming to find, that the upcoming generation is the least religious affiliated of all generations. And so this is making headlines again. The millennials made a lot of headlines, while iGen's making a lot as well. And so the statistics that are coming out, they're saying that affiliation went from starting like tracking, young people from 90% affiliated back in the day with like Gen X or baby boomers to 66% now. It's this drastic drop in religious affiliation. The hashtag self-harm with 3 M's rose, I think within 1 year, 1.7 million hashtags to 2.4 million. So we have a hurting generation as well coming up. There's an increase in mental health issues. There's from 2011 to 2016, there was a 30% increase in college students who admitted to harming themselves. And sleep deprivation is on the rise and depression is on the rise. So not only do we have these sort of, the statistics in religion and morality declining, from millennials, which Gen X millennials and iGen, we also have some real mental and physical challenges, that we're facing with our young people. And so, in about 35%, we used to call them, the rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and now it's the rise of the duns. It's not that they don't identify with a religion, it's that they've rejected their religion. They said, I'm just not Catholic anymore. And many of you know all of this. This is maybe preaching to the choir in many ways. And so and then the median age, if you've seen the recent statistics from St. Mary's Press and CARA they have a series that Bob McCarty's going around talking about. He may have come here, he's gone to a lot of cities now, called Going, Going, Gone. And their study is showing that the median age when a young person decided they were done with the Catholic faith was 13. And this is showing like a big range, like 13 to 17, and that's the age that you have them, in your classrooms. And so this is a stark reality that we're living with, and that's what I am passionate about. And within every challenge that we see, especially when we're talking about the Synod on Young People, with every challenge there's an opportunity. And so with this, I am very hopeful that we will find a way to rejuvenate our education and our ministry with young people, because these statistics are glaring. They're very glaring. So I'm going to start you off with that. So with our reflection medal, so this will be our concern. So consider how you would describe, and just take some quiet time, maybe just write down, I'm going to move you into the initial understanding part right now. What do you think is driving this? What are you seeing in front of you? What do you think drives the religious and moral decline in young people today? So how would you describe the spiritual lives of young people? And then what do you think are the reasons? What are your initial assumptions? I'll give you a couple minutes to just journal that for a minute. All right, it sounds like that's almost a natural lull that I just heard. So I'll bring you back together and just kind of ask, maybe not every table, we will not have time, but I would love to hear from you. Any volunteers of just anything in general that you have seen are possibly some of the reasons behind why young people are struggling with moral and spiritual development? Anything at all, what are we seeing? Call it out, raise your hand, I don't care. Go ahead.
I think a lot of the parents don't really have a faith so much, or at least a commitment to a religious religion. And the ones who do are so busy they don't have time to take the business.
If you couldn't hear, challenges with parents maybe not practicing the faith or having the time to pass the faith on. Absolutely, absolutely. We know that parents are the primary formators of the faith for young people. Number one, before teachers. And so with that absence, we're filling in a very gigantic gap as teachers and ministers. Very good. Any other thoughts?
Well,
Go ahead.
I noticed because I had the same thing that she said.
Yeah.
And being a new teacher and coming in, I don't know what they have learned and haven't learned, and I'm trying to get to know what both my 8th graders and my sophomores know. And I'm actually doing morality, and I see this disconnect in the family and how we can't expect them to come to the church and build the church if they don't have that building block in the family. But what I find too is they're starving to understand, well, how does the old and new come together and that be a family for them? Where I have noticed, I've been able to tie in sometimes in our conversations as what is it that Jesus came for that is also from the old? And I put the two together and it opens them up to a family. From the journey, from the beginning to the new. Like they're disconnected in that journey there. So somehow it brings them together to a family unit when I put the two together. So there's so much foreshadowing. Like you could go from, they don't even know from in the beginning of Genesis that God has proclaimed the Savior.
And so it sounds like you're taking a look at their lives. From their lives, though.
From their lives, and putting it into the old.
Right.
And then walking them through the journey and also taking the pieces out of it.
Wonderful.
How does it connect with the new?
Wonderful. And so, the dynamics of family life are very, very strong. Very strong. Yep, absolutely. Any other thoughts? Anything else? Go ahead.
Skepticism of institutions, of
Yeah.
organizations,
Yeah.
reluctance to make commitments. That's characteristic of youth always, but
Yeah,
deeper
yeah,
in
yeah.
cities now.
Yeah. The baby boomers that burned their bras, they were pretty skeptical of institutions. Yeah.
And here we are.
Exactly, here we are.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Overall skeptical of religious institutions and institutions in general, yeah.
And the effect of social media in making quick ad hoc communities that are really pretty superficial and
Okay.
anarchistic.
Yeah.
That's what they're getting some needs met there.
Quick community building. Yeah, interesting. Go ahead.
I agree with that.
Okay.
The idea of the kind of tribalism that happens,
Yes.
where you have to identify one way or the other, take a stance, and take a stand very, very quickly,
Yeah.
without looking into the nuance that might be behind something.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
I think we just don't invite them in. I think
Okay.
we don't go where they are, and we expect them to show up without an invitation to go.
And with 42 years of teaching, that's the answer. No, I agree. He said we do not invite them in. We have an expectation, but they need an invitation first. Go right ahead. Wonderful.
To build off the skepticism, but the difference in the skepticism of older generations is just constantly, every other week, we have news reports that these major institutions have lied to
Right.
and let them
Right.
down and deliberately not
Right.
invited them.
Right.
So I think it goes more than just like a healthy skepticism.
Yeah.
I think it's that sense of, I seek this meaning and you have betrayed me.
Yeah.
And I can't trust you.
Yeah, very good. The overall idea that institutions have failed, have lied. Yes, go ahead.
I'd say it's a step beyond skepticism into cynicism. Of that there is no point in allowing that respect to build
Yeah.
if you're going to be betrayed that way.
So skepticism into cynicism, yeah, and that's, we're seeing that in the voting trends of young people. They're not skeptical. They're like, oh, maybe I'll vote. They're like, I'm not going to vote. It's not going to do anything. That's cynicism. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a certain sense of immediacy that shapes their reality. They get what they want, and even what they don't want, fast. Not because they're bratty or because they're selfish, but our world is like constantly offering.
Yes.
Constantly consuming.
Yes, and so he was talking about the I don't want to call it instant gratification, but like the immediacy of everything. Like you can get everything you want at the push of a button, things like that. They do a study about like folks that go into elevators, like immediately do the close door button. It's like it's gonna close. That button doesn't do anything. But like as soon as we're in, we're like, all right, immediately close. Just that alone is this. We immediately need something to happen. And what's very interesting is the majority of the statistics that come out on the younger generations are for and from marketing firms. By and large, because that's, there was an old Frontline episode that really went into ethnographic research, which is like living and doing among the people that you're studying, ethnographic research with Gen X for marketing for like Nike. And just to learn, and I remember when I was a kid, this is dating myself and I apologize, but I remember thinking to myself, watching a commercial and thinking, oh, that's ridiculous, and making fun of the person on the commercial. Well, I never saw that commercial again. I was like, man, it's like they're in my head. Well, if I was thinking like other young people, they were, and that has not changed. It's only increased. And so they are targeted very, very much. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a great text that's out called iGen, which talks
Yes.
about
Yeah.
all of this.
Yeah.
In the study, it says that actually the kids actually rely a lot on organizations and agencies that protect them, so to speak. That they're growing up slower because they're almost babied by their parents, these helicopter parents, but now they're called the lawnmower parents, where they want to eliminate all struggle from their kids' lives. So it's almost like there's so much protection that they're not willing to grow through the challenges or the struggles. And so anything that does challenge them tends to go against what comes so easy or so quick. That you don't see immediate results in.
And they're not fully prepared when the challenges come, and I think the book goes on to say, like it's good information for employers because here they come, be prepared. They're quite coddled. They're not really ready to handle challenges.
And then they wonder why they can't handle anxiety and stress. And
Well,
depressed.
these are some of the mental health issues that we're talking about. Okay, we'll take one more in the back. Go ahead. We'll do both of you. Go ahead. You in the front first, and then in the back.
On the heels of that, when they run into crises and actual tragedies, they are not equipped to then say, okay, God is with me to walk through this with me, but rather they become naturally angry with that and then reject me as a result.
And that's when we can look at our curriculums as helping out with faith development as well, not just, the text of the curriculum. Yeah, go ahead.
I would push back a little bit, so maybe an unpopular opinion, but
We welcome all opinions.
I mean, I've been doing a little bit of study with like the youngest generation, Generation X, which is significantly different than the millennial generation. Like millennials, people think are teenagers, but the oldest millennial is like 40 years old, which to a teenager is ancient. And the biggest difference between Gen X and millennials is that Gen X is a post 9/11 generation, and because of that, they've grown up in a world that's they've grown up in a world that has been, I don't know, how do I say this? It's just war and terrorism. All they know is war and terrorism and violence and a heightened awareness of school shootings. And because of that, I don't know if you can accuse a teenager of not knowing suffering, because they might know the worst suffering at the age of 7.
Yeah. To have to consider having a backpack that's bulletproof. We didn't have to consider that.
Right.
None of us did. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you. We're going to move on. We could do this all morning. I can see that. So this is our initial understanding. That's why we did this. There's no rights, there's no wrongs at this point. This is our assumptions, our initial understandings, things like that. Well, we'll leave the genie on there. He looks fun. So the background behind all of this. So we'll kind of get into a lot of the narratives that kind of form, maybe implicitly form how we think about young people today. About 12, 13, 14 years ago, it keeps doing things. 12, 13, 14-ish years ago, when my youth ministry career was starting, everyone I knew had a copy of the National Study of Youth and Religion book, Soul Searching, and that was on the early stage of millennials at that time. It was all on their shelves, and I realize this is outdated for all of us now, but there's an absolute reason to bring this up, because the narrative has stayed the same. We hear the same things in our churches about that study and about those labels, and those labels are coming to label the next generation, because it's all about disaffiliation, and it's all about the reasons why we believe young people are disaffiliating and can't really form any sense of moral authority or direction in their lives. And it comes from a lot of these terms. And so we'll delve kind of quickly into these. And my graduate students will still talk about it today, which means they're teachers, just like all of you. And so they still quote much of this without knowing that they're quoting it. And so the authors of the study, so Christian Smith and the cohort, Kenda Dean, she writes about it as well in Almost Christian. They call the young millennials, they called them moralistic therapeutic deists, or deism. And it's this big fancy, philosophical title, that really says that young people, and this is their faith, they would describe an affiliated faith from Westerhoff, they would say it's moralistic therapeutic deist faith. That rolls off the tongue. But anyways, so this is the faith that they would hold, is that, kind of this idea that God created the world, but kind of left us alone about it, and is there, as kind of a genie, anytime, or a bellhop, anytime you need God, you just call. I need an A on a test, call God, and then, that the most important thing God wants you to do is to be nice to people and be fair and live a happy life. And then, you'll go to heaven. And that's it. That's as deep as the faith goes. And that, to the authors, was a really big problem. They took the interview and survey data, and they said, this is what they found as a result of what they heard. And so in that case, that's, there's no depth to that. There's no, understanding of the book of Genesis. There's no understanding of the Paschal mystery. There's just this deist God that's there to help you, like therapy, and with no real sense of morals beyond fairness. And so this is the critique kind of laid down. And this is still what sort of becomes the narrative for the generation coming up, because it's getting worse, because what we're finding is there's even less religious affiliation. So this must be even stronger, is kind of the argument. And so I found, myself back at Fordham, and I thought, I'm supposed to write a dissertation. I'm like, what am I going to do that's original? Everybody has come before me. What am I supposed to do? And my professor for research methods, she said, just look at the newspaper. That'll help. And I was like, oh, catastrophes. What's religious education got to do with a tsunami? I don't, I'm like, what is the newspaper doing? And then I came across Stephen Brooks. He did a book review on the most recent, at that time, like 2011-ish or whatever it was, the most recent series in the National Study of Religion, Youth and Religion by Christian Smith, and it's called Lost in Transition, The Dark Side of Emerging Adulthood. And they felt that soul searching, so it's the same people, same interview data, it's just the interview data, not the survey. They felt that soul searching had so many disparaging aspects of young adult moral development and individualism and consumerism that it warranted a whole nother book. And so it is bleak, and as Stephen Brooks is noting, the start of, if it feels right, do it. Like, that's their morality. If it feels right, you can do it. That's the extent of what they think is morally right, according to the authors. And so, Stephen Brooks notes how depressing it was. He said the book is depressing. And, it is. Some of it is, when asked about right or wrong, they can usually agree that rape and murder are wrong. But from those extreme cases, aside from those, moral thinking didn't really enter the picture. When considering things like drunk driving, cheating, in school, or cheating on a partner, they say, I don't know, I don't really deal with moral things very much. They don't consider any of these things moral, just like the major ones, like don't kill people, and be nice, and that's about the extent of it. And so they really didn't see, there's no nuance, there's no depth to the moral development of young people. And so it really got me thinking and questioning, what can I do with this? And I thought, this is a good headline. This has to do with religions, for starters, not catastrophes, although it could be considered one. And I thought, so I got the book and I thought, what can I do? What can I do to help religious educators and ministers, grapple with this problem, really help, young people through this issue that we're seeing? And at first glance, the researchers, I believed it, I kept it all. My initial understanding came from that book. And I have a different color highlighter that I used in that book than when I went back and read it again. And I keep it to this day to remind myself of my initial understanding, because I thought, man, this is a problem. This is really terrible. The results were that 60% of young people today have an individualistic sense of morality that's like, me personally, I wouldn't do it, but someone else could, and who am I to judge, And 47% believe that morals were relative. And again, this is the study from the millennials, but this is only kind of progressing with iGen, almost getting much, much worse. That morals are relative, and that there's no way to judge. If you have a conflicting sense of morality with somebody else, we're like, well, there's no universal moral truths. It's just however you were raised is what's morally right, And so, it was bleak. I mean, the studies, they were bleak. The language from the book is sad. It says the moral character of young people is a problem, and revealing an overall impoverishment. And what's more is that today's culture in society is the culprit. That in fact, American culture and society has left young people morally adrift. And that's the title of their chapter. Their first chapter is morally adrift, or morality adrift. And that parenting is to blame, education is to blame, American culture and society is to blame for letting young people wander into a sea of moral relativism. And so they believe that more education is what's needed, because if they can't articulate what's moral, it's because they don't know. So it kind of becomes like this logical, deductive reasoning sort of thing. You can't articulate it because you don't know, you need more instruction. And so we kind of have this pendulum shift where direct instruction becomes, well, you have to know the faith, you have to know your sacraments, you have to know your prayers, you have to know the history, you have to know your scripture. It's a lot of have to know. And so that's kind of the solution throughout the book, is like, just give them more information. I mean, they just don't know it. We're not doing a good job giving it to them. And to a degree, that could be possibly accurate, And so as a society, the argument is that we have let them down, And so we hear similar conversations in the media, in our schools, in our parishes. We'll hear, the keynote address for NC-YAMA, if you remember what that was, the old National Youth Ministry team, which is now our advisory team to try and figure out what to do with NC-YAMA. And so one of the keynote addresses years ago was, it was about branding. It was the idea that moral relativism, individualism, and secularism are the culprits, to this decline in religion and morality. And so the answer is just rebrand yourself like Coca-Cola did. It's like, well, people, same taste, just different marketing, and so that works out well with faith because, we drink faith and it tastes like Coca-Cola. But anyway, that was the argument, is just rebrand yourself and get better with technology. Like, stop avoiding technology. If you're not online, you won't be alive. You don't exist if you're not online in some way or with an app or something like that. And so that just rebrand it. Message is good, and 2 years ago, the Convocation for Catholic Leaders, the same thing. I heard the same thing. And so that's why, while the study is old, the narrative has perpetuated. And so I realize we're in iGen now and the studies are new. However, the narrative is still the same, that it is moral relativism, individualism, and secularism that is the problem behind why young people are disaffiliating and are losing a sense of overall morality. And so that, again, all of these narratives kind of get me thinking, and that it's having effect on our ministry efforts and evangelization, And so they say, the answer 9 times out of 10 is to stay strong. Apologetics is the way to go. Our faith is intact. There's nothing wrong with the faith that was passed down from Christ. Just keep going strong with it and be bold. Be bold with it and just keep going. And so that, to me, that wasn't, we can keep going, but the statistics are still declining. This has been the narrative since the millennials, and the statistics are still declining. So all these questions keep coming up in my head is that method working? Is there another method? Are we missing something? And I kept thinking, are we missing something? So I want you to take just a moment, and we'll just do this individually. Just take a look back at your initial understanding and think if anything from this narrative has challenged it, has, not been what you thought, or has really confirmed what you thought. Like, kind of do like a pro and con with that if you want. All right, we're not going to share that one out. Just kind of go through the process of practical theological reflection with me here. And so now we're going to take that narrative, now we're going to look through several contexts. We're going to get into our sort of testing a little bit more. So we kind of tested just there with sociological commentary, that is well talked about in our field that we might be familiar with hearing. And so I'm going to kind of bring us now from that into some psychology. And that's where a lot of the bulk of my research was in. And so if anyone's familiar with like courses in human development or anything from your undergrad or graduate school days, you've heard of Freud. We've all heard of Freud. Piaget, Erik Erikson, Lawrence Kohlberg for moral development, Jim Fowler for faith development, all of these sort of names. And so then there's a guy named Robert Kegan who comes along on the scene in the 90s out of Harvard, fancy old Harvard. And, so he really takes, and he's the guy that I studied. And the reason for that is because Piaget really did cognitive levels with children. Erik Erikson got us through like youth to adulthood. And then there's this nuance of young adulthood. They really started studying Gen X finally, it started with studying Gen X to realize that there's kind of like a period between adolescence and adulthood. And so we have this, Jeffrey Arnett, I think, coins emerging adulthood, but, it's young adult years became their own stage. And so there weren't a lot of old writers on that. And then there was nuance with Lawrence Kohlberg because, he only studied white men. And so Carol Gilligan comes along and she's like, there's a women's way of knowing that's an ethic of care and responsibility that we aren't talking about, So there's all of these things. So Kegan takes all of this. He doesn't so much take Fowler, but he certainly talks about religious socialization. And he takes all of these theories and wraps them up, and that's what we call constructive developmental psychology. It's in the field of Piaget, if you know how he worked. And then Erikson was like the social level, Piaget was the cognitive level, and so it wraps all of that into 5 sort of big stages. So I'm going to walk you through that just very briefly, and then we'll get into those, the levels of development that you'll be seeing with your young people. And adolescence and emerging, adulthood, and what we can do with that. So what we're seeing in development, how that sheds light on the narrative, and then what we can do about it. So that's where we're going to try and go from here in a short amount of time. So infancy is really just, like ages, infancy to 7. These are not hard years. These are just to give you an idea of the age group. And this is when it's just like life is like impulses, and sort of illogical, fleeting feelings. For Fowler in faith development, this is where you establish like a sense of hope and trust with an infant, with a young child. But also fear of abandonment can come into that too when you lay your baby down and to go to bed and they scream, and that's that fear of abandonment. That's what we're talking about in stage 1 there. And so the second stage is really adolescence. And this can be, from around 7, 8 years old to, mid-teens. And that is where it's like, is it 14, 15, 17, there's a transition between this and young adulthood, so you'll see the endings of stage 2 with many of your students are full on, if you teach 8th grade, full on stage 2, or transitioning towards stage 3. So stage 2, when it comes to moral development and the way that we understand and organize our knowing, we are really deeply talking about like rewards and punishments, like especially when we, elementary and middle school kids, I don't know if middle school does it as much, but there's like a reward for behavior, like the red light, yellow light, green light thing for elementary school. There's a reason for that, because you're teaching kids how to be socialized into a way of living, and because otherwise they won't do anything with any logic at all, and so that's what terrific kid awards are for, is to show, rewards for good behavior. And that's very developmentally appropriate, sort of between, these years. And so, but in adolescence, your way of knowing and your way of moral development, there's no understanding of the golden rule. It's this idea that you do what's considered right because you don't want to get in trouble, and so it's not because you think it's right. You've been told it's what you do, and if it's in your self-interest, you'll do it. Like, you're not going to do your chores unless you get an allowance, kind of a thing. And that's very normal, very, very normal. But as parents, we, and teachers, we expect more from young people, especially high school. We're like, no, why don't you understand why that's bad? And they're like, I don't understand it, I don't care, am I gonna get out of detention or what, And so that's a very natural understanding, but we are around a natural socialization to help them grow beyond that, to get this idea of empathy and the golden rule that comes next. And so these periods of time are naturally good settings for positive, healthy development, because you're in a school with parents and teachers that are paying attention to you, and you have coaches and you have mentors. When you leave high school, a lot of those things disappear, so the transitions become longer and the stages become longer. So these aren't very long periods of time. Stage 2 isn't that long. Stage 3 can be 20 years for some people, and so that's why I bring that up, because it's a natural, the schooling environment for a kid is a natural environment for helping you grow, beyond that whole like rewards and consequences kind of thing. And Fowler talks about how during adolescence, you're moving from kind of like this fantasy faith, like not really understand, everything's kind of illogical and, fleeting. But, then you kind of have a more imaginative faith, and so in later adolescence, it becomes a little bit more literal and more concrete, that God is kind of like a parent. You can see that relationship, that God's looking out for you, and that's about the extent of it. Almost, maybe considered therapeutic in a way. And that's emerging later adolescence towards level 3. And so the third level comes in, and there's a couple names for this. We can call it the socialized level if you want. And so that's about, it's not 17, 18 like a year, that's 17/18. Maybe that's about when it comes out. Sometimes for girls, faster than boys. We always talk about girls' development is a little bit faster. And so you may have a 16, 17-year-old, girls in your class that may have made the transition from adolescence to emerging adulthood. It's very possible. But usually we're talking senior year in high school. They start to think really differently about their role in the world and who they are. And so this is the period of time where we can start saying, like, adolescence is about fairness, like doing what's right because it's fair, and then we get into kind of like justice in level 3, doing what's right because you now have this ability to take on interpersonal relationships, meaning that like you can actually take the perspective of somebody else. Level 2, you were like, I get that you don't want me to do that, but that's just you. I'm going to do it if I want to do it and hopefully not get caught. Whereas level 3, it's like, I know you don't want me to do it, and I don't want to let you down. It's this idea that you're living up to the expectations of those very close to you, your teachers, your mentors, your coaches, your parents, and that's everyone in this room. And so if we look back on our childhood, we often think of someone, in high school who was a mentor for us, somebody who was always there for us, and maybe that's why we became a teacher, because we wanted to be like that person. And that's probably because you were around this stage where that person and their opinions and their beliefs meant a great deal to you and maybe formed you, very largely formed you. And so typically this is your parent, your parents are forming you. And so what they believe is naturally what you're going to start to believe, and then in school you start to learn some new things in high school, and with good coaches, good mentors, you take on what they think. And so this is the process of religious socialization. it is far different now than it ever was. You know, we have parents that are working, parents that are at home. We don't have two-parent families all the time. Grandparents don't live nearby. You know, like the parish community is not so much a thing for many kids anymore. And those were all agents of socialization. And so now we really just have the school and a home that looks very different, you know, where kids are going all different places at all different times. And so it's important to know that our role as teachers is crucial in the religious socialization, even if parents are struggling to pass on their faith. And so it's really an excellent period of time. You know, like I said, the golden rule becomes a thing. Like you start to really understand why you would do something for others, to the point, and Carol Gilligan would say, to the point where you might even put yourself on the back burner, your own needs, for the needs of others. And this is where sort of like the peer pressure in the peer group comes in, you know, because when in the early stages of level 3, it's the authority of your peer group, your peers, that you're really thinking about. And then as you kind of transition in this stage, and this is why I love Keegan, because he talks about the nuances in each stage, then it's authority that becomes what you want to please, the expectations that you want to live up to. So it's between peer group and authority, like your boss. You could be in level 3 until you're 40. And so you might be living up to the expectations of your coworkers and your boss. And that was what some of the research, the later research that Keegan was finding, is that, you know, that over half of Americans, all ages, you know, crosses of life and all of that, all the people that they studied, all genders, all cultures, all races, that over half don't leave level 3 and make it to level 4 until like midlife, like 40s. And 40s is like the earliest for most of them. And so, you know, when we talk about in terms of work, you know, if you want somebody in their job to just take ownership of what they're doing and not have to ask all the time about what they're doing, you know, and not have to please everybody that they're working with. And it, you know, if that leads to like a crisis of like, I don't know how to get my job done because I know if I do it this way, half these people are gonna be unhappy with it and the other half are gonna be fine. And then that makes it so that you struggle to sleep at night because you're trying to live up to everybody's expectations. And so and then Keegan talks largely about how this comes out at work and in parenting, parents that want their children, you know, to be happy with them. And we see that a lot with our parents as well. And so this stage doesn't go away for a long period of time. That's a little depressing, but that's okay. But it's knowing it and knowing how to work with that and learning nurturing environments and mentorships is what's key, and we'll get into that today. And so briefly, stage 4 is that you have now taken ownership of what you believe is true. And so there's a big transition, and a very lengthy one that Keegan was finding between 3 and 4, where when that happens, you know, you start going off to college or getting a job, and this transition can last a long time, years. Is that, you know, and again, it's different for everybody, but that transition will take maybe a different setting in your life, a different social group, a different work group, whatever it is, that really questions, you know, asks you to question what you thought was true. You have new experiences now. You know, you were never out past curfew. You were the good kid. You always did the right thing. And then you go to college and, you know, you're experimenting with things and you're staying out late and, you know, you're thinking to yourself, my parents would kill me, but they're not here. But you notice how they said my parents would kill me, not that I know inside that this isn't the right thing for me, you know. So that's still operating at stage 3, but also with a little bit of abandonment, you know, and because that immediate authority is no longer near you anymore. And so the more that goes on, the more questions develop. And Sharon Parks, who talks about campus ministry a lot in college and young adults, she calls this shipwreck, you know, like this crisis of faith that you can go through. And that it's actually a very normal period of transition between level 3 and level 4, where you are calling into question what you ever thought was true as a child. Everything your high school teachers told you, you're starting to think, is that true for me? Do I understand this well enough? Can I hold this up to scrutiny when people ask me? And if you can't, what does that mean about you? What does that mean about the way you were raised? And it's a crisis of identity for a lot of people. You know, I have a lot of young adults, and I myself, many of us may have gone through this sort of like crisis of finding out your faith, and then hopefully coming out on the good side of it, you know. And a lot more today are coming out on the other side of it, and doing it earlier as well. And so that's, again, the role of mentoring. Whenever we think to ourselves, you know, how was it that, somebody actually asked me recently with the events that were going on in Pennsylvania with the grand jury report, somebody came up to me, a colleague came up to me and said, why did you stay? Just like that, like just not hello. Why did you stay? And I was like, oh, that's a loaded question. And I said, can remember the faces of the people in my life, the individuals in my life that just planted small seeds and just helped me on the journey and let me know questions were okay. And that to me is mentoring. That is a mentoring community when we think of our schools as mentoring communities, that each one of us has the ability and potential to mentor young people. Not just teach them, but teaching as mentoring, And so stage 4 is when you've gotten through all of these challenges and you've decided, this is who I am, this is my integrity, this is what I will stand for, and this is what I believe in. I know I won't do this and I won't do that because I have to live with it. It's not any longer that I don't want my parents to see, or I don't want to let anybody else down. You're now letting yourself down. And that's huge, because now you have this inner voice that you can say, this is what I believe and here's why. And the thing with level 3 is Keegan was saying, it doesn't hold up to criticism very well. If you're asking somebody, why is stealing wrong? They're gonna say, I don't know, it's a law, man. You're not supposed to steal, it's like a commandment and stuff, And then they would say, but why is it? But why do you follow it? And they would say, well, because you're supposed to. Like, it doesn't go much further than that. It doesn't say because I wouldn't want anyone to steal from me. Sometimes you hear that. But it doesn't really get into like the whole socialization of stealing. Like if we steal, everybody steals, the whole society would fall apart. And that kind of moves you a little bit more to 4. Or the idea of like, I know I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I did that. That would be level 4. But we don't always hear that from young people. We usually hear something like, I was taught that. Or it's a law, and if you ever taught theory of knowledge, there's which some of our folks have, there's a unit on ethics, and it goes through how, ethics is not these things. If ethics was laws, then we would still have some pretty terrible laws we'd be following today, because they were laws, And so that can't be the answer, because laws can change. That's kind of the idea, but level 3 can't really critically reflect on that just yet, until level 4 when they've made it their own. And so in terms of faith, this is a faith that seeks understanding. This faith that wants to understand why you have faith. And this is a very developed and adult version of faith, And so then there's level 5. And we know a few of these folks. This is probably, for Keegan's research, probably much later in life, maybe retirement. The names that we can think of are maybe Dorothy Day, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela. We know these names individually very well because there were so few of them. And so it takes a lot to get us into this whole like universal faith. And it's not necessarily universal moral principles. It's this idea that, that your sense of morality applies to the entire world. So you now care for yourself and care for others equally. It's not really one or the other any longer. And it's this idea that you embody your integrity, the idea that what you believe in is how you act every day. And so you will maybe stop whatever your life was and start on a mission somewhere, which is, when we think of Mother Teresa, she's doing things that many of us are not doing. She devoted her entire life, bodily and spiritual life, to helping anyone, not just her group. And so in stage 4 can get into a very kind of like inroad, this is my group, this is my political affiliation, my ideology, and I'm good with that, And stage 5 transcends all of that to see that all these groups count, every voice counts by virtue of being human and being children of God. And so you really, like, your whole body is in your integrity now. And that takes a lot, clearly, because there's not a lot of people make it that far in life, but they can. They absolutely can if we focus on development a little bit more and how to nurture others in their walks of life. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of our sort of stages of faith development. This is my fun picture of, we do what's called Faith Acts in the summertime. It's a high school program that comes on campus. High school youth theology institutes, if you've heard of them, maybe you have, because they're all over the country at college campuses. So these are our students that came and they were working in the Edible Schoolyard. I think that's 2 years ago that they came. So I still work with high school kids, which is really fun for me. Like once out of the year, I'll work with them in a mentoring program. So I'm going to give you a quick example of a young person who, like, and these are my I'm going to give fake names to them. An example of how these stages might sort of come out. So between level 3 and like transitioning out, and then I'll go into the nuances of what we can do with level 2 and level 3. And so the story is Jessica, my good friend Jessica. You know, she's a peer minister in campus ministry. She's going to be a senior in high school. You know, this is her year as a senior, very excited about it. She's given witness talks before. She's on speech and debate, so she's very articulate at arguing a point, whether she agrees with it or not. Speech and debate, she's got to argue it, you know. And so she's in Ms. Sherman's class, who teaches AP environmental science, AP bio, I think, or whichever one it is. I think it's environmental science. And Ms. Sherman starts off every single year showing her kids Food Inc. Anybody seen Food Inc.? The documentary, I think it's PBS. Yeah, it's like factory farming in the United States and the ins and outs of that. And it's an eye-opener. And she starts out every single year with that video, and it hooks the kids. You know, they're like, what? And this is like that strong sense of social justice that teenagers have. They're like, oh yeah, I can get around. Like, what are we gonna do about this, you know? And so Jessica and her friends start looking at Ms. Sherman as like a mentor. You know, they start eating lunch in her room. They talk about ways that they can conserve, like this minimalistic lifestyle. You know, they watch a YouTube where a girl's got like just a glass jar. And like, that's her trash, you know? And it's like, what? How do you do this, you know? And so they're thinking about ways that their lives can, you know, in terms of social justice, can deal with, you know, in this AP environmental science class, you know, how they're being called as Christians to kind of grapple with this. And, you know, and again, she gives witness talks. She's a peer leader, you know, and her theology teacher works with Ms. Sherman across the, you know, religion across the curriculum. And so they supplement some of their social justice activities and course work on Laudato Si, you know, and so both of the teachers kind of share that back and forth, and so they have a good cross-curricular connection between science and theology and social justice. And so, you know, she loves all of this, and so this whole minimalistic conserving, you know, they're really avoiding plastic bags. They saw what California was doing. They're like, you gotta pay for a plastic bag? That's the way we should go, you know. And so everything's reusable, and she's excited about it. She goes off to college. And she's in her dorm for her first time, you know, and she doesn't know where farmers markets are anymore. She's in a whole new state, and, you know, she's living in a dorm, and then finally they're like, well, we're gonna starve if we don't go and get some food. And, you know, goes out, somebody who has a car takes them, they go out for their first grocery run as young adults, you know, and they get all these plastic bags, and her dorm mate, you know, sweet mate gets, you know, this whole bin of plastic water bottles, you know, water. And she just looks at her friends and she goes, oh man, Miss Sherman would kill me if she saw me doing this. And so she still doesn't say, I can't do this. She says, Miss Sherman would kill me if I did this. And so her sense of moral authority is still not inside of her yet. She isn't doing this because she believes it. She knows she believes it because it was passed on to her. And that's very normal, you know, and it's how we get them to think critically beyond that, you know, and to know that thinking critically is important, you know, for our lives. And so I kind of give you that as a quick example. And so I want to give you, we're going to be close on time here, but I do want to give you just a minute. You know, if you want, close your eyes. Think of a young person right now that may exemplify stage 2 or stage 3, maybe both. Think of young people you know that could be between, you know, rewards and consequences and living up to other people's expectations. And then take a look at your initial understanding and see if anything's changed from a little bit of this testing that we just did, a little bit of analysis in psychology. Has anything changed? Has anything remained the same? So what emerges for me as I read all of this in development is a very, very new picture. You know, I start to see a different image of young people based on the sociological studies versus the psychological studies. You know, we were told that it's a real problem that young people don't have a sense of moral authority. And then I read that that might not be a problem, that might be very normal. The problem is we aren't really focusing on how to accompany them through that journey. Better, maybe. And so I think to myself, what is all of this saying? This idea that if you interviewed somebody at level 3 and they said, I can't tell you why I have morals like this, I just know I was raised that way. That's not, that was looked at as very problematic. That's where we got this idea of moral individualism and moral relativism from, is from data like that said, I can't tell you what's right or wrong, I just know what I was taught. That you can't critically, in level 3, you can't critically reflect on why you were taught what you were taught. You just know it because you're just socialized into it. You haven't really taken ownership of it yet. That's level 4. And if you interviewed somebody in transition between 3 and 4, Keegan flat out says you will relativize what you thought was true. Like you will, and that's again Sharon Park's shipwreck. Like you will think to yourself, I don't know anymore. I've had so many experiences. I thought, I've heard young people say, they went on pro-life marches and, they know that abortion is wrong. And then they go to college and they're about to graduate college, and their best friend, who they've had for 4 years in college, who they would probably give their life for, probably have, at times, who decides that she's going to not carry a child anymore. And then this young person has no idea. She's like, I'm supposed to abandon her? What am I supposed to? I know it's wrong. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. She goes through a real crisis of faith because she doesn't know how to accompany her friend and keep her beliefs at the same time. And this can go on for years. This crisis of faith can go on for years. And so if you interview one of these young people that's in transition and they're saying, man, I don't know what's right or wrong anymore. And you're going to say that that's this relativism? It might sound like it. I used to tell my high school students, I said, are you relativists? Let me ask you, would you take a baby and throw it out the window? And they'd be like, what? And I was like, probably not, right? And they're like, no, we wouldn't do that. Because they would tell me, you don't know what's true for one person, not true for the other person. I said, but would you do this? I said, then you're not a relativist. You're maybe a moral pluralist. You maybe can't decide what's right or wrong, but you do have morals. Moral relativism is the absence of morals. It says there are no morals at all. And so I said, you're maybe moral pluralist, maybe you're still figuring it out for yourself, but I wouldn't say that you don't have any sense of what's right and wrong. And the other side of the data, is the questions that they were asking them. They were asking very kind of doctrinal questions, and one of the responses that really got me was, that one of the young people thought like a moral issue was whether or not they should, move to a different apartment. And that was very much joked at in the book, And then if you look at Carol Gilligan and the ethic of care, moving out on your roommate might be a really significant deal, Like you might be letting them down. And if they're very close to you, that's living up to their expectations. That's developmental, and that could be a moral issue to them because they care deeply for the person that they could be moving out on. And so at close glance, without fully getting to the heart of why people say what they say, we've kind of made a narrative about young people that might not be that fair. It might be a little bit over the top in terms of what we're projecting, what the adult community is projecting, the expectations we have of young people. They might be unrealistic for what they're capable of. And so again, like I said, it really gives us a whole new picture to kind of think about. So moving beyond that, teens, Gen Z today, they question almost everything, and so developmentally, when we talk about questioning in that shipwreck, we're talking about your 20s and 30s, However, and so when we see the questioning coming from high school kids today, is that idea that we do question everything because we now have technology at our fingertips and we can just look it up if we don't like what you're saying, It might be fake news, but who cares? I looked it up and that's what it is, And, so that idea of questioning, and so when it comes to that, it's this notion that it's important to keep in mind their developmental capacity. They may not, if they're operating at level 2 and asking a lot of questions, level 2 is this notion of what's right and what's wrong. Just tell me what's right and wrong so I know the boundaries so I don't get in trouble, And maybe I get rewards or good grades or whatever it is. But it's really rewards and consequences. And the questioning could be how to fit within that boundary. The questioning could be, am I supposed to believe it or not? Just tell me if I am, and then tell me why. And that's where a lot of folks kind of fall short. Well, it's, if we're also operating from level 3, which many of us might be, do we know why? Can we articulate why? Or do we also know it was what's passed down, or because it's tradition, or because we know it's true? Or do we actually ingrain that in young people and say, this is how I live my faith. This is how society can function if we all lived this way. And this is the beauty and the joy that comes from within me from living a certain way in a certain Christian lifestyle. And so, there will be questioning at a young age, but think about that questioning as kind of like, what's the boundary? What's the barrier? What am I not supposed to do? What am I supposed to believe? That sort of a thing. And then as you get older in high school, it is like, no, I really need to know what this means to me, And that means they might want to know what you believe, because they might want to live up to your expectations of what you believe. They might really want to take ownership of that for themselves. And so it's important to kind of think about, I'm going to try and delve into, sort of like, so then we go initial understanding, deeper understanding, and adjusting our methods. This idea of what can we do now that we know sort of some of this information. And Keegan talks about, being good company on the journey, and that his second book, The Mental Demands of Modern Life, I think that's what it's called, talks about how we're often good company on the wrong journey, that we have overt expectations of the journey that someone should be on. This expectation that young people should have a moral authority, they should know internally why they believe what's right, and to expect that over and over again makes a young person think there's something wrong with them. They're like, I don't know why. Why do you keep asking me that, And so to be good company on the right journey is what he talks about. And so then, I'm going to kind of delve quickly into some of these. It means accompanying them and meeting them where they are developmentally, and we're not psychologists, that's fine. But like knowing some of the markers gives you a good hint of like where you can kind of go in your classrooms with some of this. So one of the things that I used to start doing, this is one of my favorite things to do, is when you're setting up procedures your first couple weeks of school, do like anybody use student learning inventories? Like find out how they function, how your kids kind of know what they know. So student learning, I'm thinking like kinesthetic, auditory, visual, like how they learn well, that kind of a thing. So get them there's quick, just Google them and you can find quick documents for that. And you can make heterogeneous groups out of that. You can use Myers-Briggs as well, those that are real process oriented or those that really need to just get the job done. And then you can also do Kagan cooperative grouping as well. And so the point of these, so what I would do with these, and this kind of springs us into the next couple activities that I do, will tell you, so I have the kids take an index card, color code them in colors that I give them because I take the index cards back, put their information on it, and then if there's a subject, especially if I taught TOK, theory of knowledge, we would go into all of the subjects. So if there was some that were really heavy in science, some in math, some in religion, we would do interdisciplinary groups, so I would do subjects too. But get all these things on an index card, color code them, and so when I would stand at the door in between periods, I would be like, because I'm always a little behind on my lesson planning. So I'm making the groups as they're walking in, but it's because they're color-coded and I'm doing it really fast. And they know exactly what I'm doing and they know we're working in groups that day, And so they're either excited because they're level 3 and they like to work with each other, or they hate it because they're level 2 and they don't get the point of seeing others' perspectives. And so that's what kind of tells me where they are and whether they hate it. And so some things to do after that. Is jigsaw. And jigsaw can be done a couple ways. Some ways I've seen it done and I'm not in love with it, but the way that I have used it before is to send homework a couple nights in advance on several different case studies or stories. This could be, biblical narratives. This could be issues of social justice. They each have a different one, but it's wrapped around the same theme. And then when they come in, so this is where the Kagan grouping kind of comes in. Everybody has a job. So it's not just you're in groups now, kind of like random groups. It's very intentional groups. So your level 2s that need to know that what they're doing is going to get them a grade. There's a reward for them working with others because they don't enjoy it, So they have to be the recorder. They have a job, they have to do something. Someone's a timekeeper, someone's a summarizer. So make your level 2s the summarizer, Make that person have to listen to other people. And so to help level 2s move, and I hate calling people levels, but just for simplicity's sake, to get your level 2s to kind of move towards level 3, you want to nurture that and you want to give them opportunities to step into the shoes of somebody else and to see the relevance of how another way of living is. Structured debates are really good at that, where they have to debate the opposite side that they would never have. So you say, what's your favorite topic? You guys pick, and then you switch all the papers. They love that. They don't, they hate it. But they get into it eventually. Have them solve a problem, give them all 4 different, scenarios, case studies, whatever it is, and have them solve a problem according to the Catholic faith. What would you do if you were a person of faith? And if they're not a person of faith, it makes them step into that role and makes them think in a way that they would refuse to think before. So those are just two, and you can do different religious. If you teach the world religions course, the elective for the Bishop's Framework, you can do all 4 different religions. You can ask each one of them, especially when it comes to interreligious dialogue. You can have them find local stories of local religious traditions and then share those out, and each person is responsible for that. And then you can also add an added layer of that where you can have them give feedback to one another, and that becomes a part of the grade too, And you can kind of go around and monitor that. It's a lot of grading, don't worry about it. You just listen when you walk around to your groups and see if they're on track or not. And then when you look at the check marks to be like, so-and-so was on task, so-and-so wasn't, you're like, yeah, I saw that, and you know who they were and if they were on task or not. And then my next one is numbered heads. Anybody, this is a Kagan strategy. Anybody know number heads? Okay, so everybody gets a number 1 through 4, and then the number is called at the end of class, and then you have to summarize the group discussion on what they learned. This helps level 2. So everyone gets a number, and then when they're done with their group work, you call, whatever it is, roll dice if you want to be fair or something like that, and you call number 2, and that person has to then summarize what the whole group said. So it makes level 2 listen to others, and it makes them actually have to value what somebody else is saying. So that's very helpful, especially those that teach freshmen, sophomore, and juniors. And then it helps level 3 because you're helping their interpersonal skills. And so Keegan talks about in mentorship a balance of like support and challenge. That's what we need in our lives. We need to affirm the level that they are at, but challenge them to grow beyond that. And so level 3, you're going to challenge them by a little bit more critical thinking. And while they're not going to get to level 4 for quite some time, they are going to get to a period in their life where they're going to question a lot of things. And if we can at least teach them that questioning is okay, if you can model your faith journey for them, kind of model vulnerability for them and say, and you may already do this, I could be preaching to the choir, but if you model to them, how you came to understanding. Sometimes I used to model everything that I would do, especially if it was a writing assignment or something like that. I would get, the old Elmos where you would like show them your writing. I know we don't use those things anymore, but you could type it or something. And I would say, I wonder about this article that I just read. I have this note in the margin. I wonder how I would put this together. And I would verbalize all that in class and teaching a critical thinking process on writing something. And so you could model your faith journey. If somebody asks you a challenging question about why bad things happen to good people, you can start with your journey. And you could say, I always wondered that too. And then I started giving my life to God, and I started seeing things in a different way and seeing that challenges always come our way. Maybe the answer is you don't get more than you can accept, but sometimes that really belittles young people that have been through terrible trauma, But on the other side of that, you just model that, you're not always sure what the mind of God is, but you do know that you trust God. You do know that you put your life in God's hands. And if you model it from your perspective, then you're helping them take on that socialization. It's not a textbook anymore. Now it's a person. And that's, we want young people are living up to the expectations of people closest to them. So the more that we can model our faith journey for them honestly, the more chance they have. I have one of my Catholic school teachers over the pond, the big lake, Pontchartrain, that's by New Orleans and then the North Shore. She always allows, I think like maybe for her time frame, it's, we all have very, very packed curriculums. She does like 2 Fridays a month where she does like, I would call it fishbowl, but that's not, like that's a Socratic seminar, I think. But it's like you all put your questions into a container and she pulls them out. And on Fridays, she goes through the questions and they're anonymous and nobody knows what they are. That's very scary if you think you need to have all the answers. It's very scary if you're worried your principal is gonna hear you said something wrong. But she talks with her principal. So get in dialogue with your co-teachers and your principal and say, what, can we offer some kind of critical questioning for our level 3s that are gonna emerge into a questioning period of their lives when they go to college? Are they gonna have a faith when they come out? Are they gonna feel judged? Are they gonna feel like they've let everyone down because they're doubting? So can we model for them that that's a natural process that we will go through and that will be there for them? Tell them to email you when they're in college. I get emails still from my high school students. One is on a ship somewhere. I don't know what she's doing. She's on some academic program on a ship. Socratic seminars and structured debates was the last one, and I kind of mentioned that already. And that's a way, Socratic seminars can be done 100 different ways. You can have, but if each person is taking a note and actually going off what the last person said in that seminar, kind of like if you go around, everybody has a comment on an article that you've read, that you actually have to say, from what I heard from, Jane over here, affirms what I thought, but then I would challenge it. You can't just repeat what that person said. You have to actually have listened to it and then articulate it differently for the grade. And so you just sit there and you observe, and you just give grades based on what you're hearing, And so your grading's done, first of all. You don't have to do it after school because you did it during the seminar. And then you can promote leadership skills and development, which is another excellent way of getting level 2s to become level 3s, and having somebody moderate that session and facilitate it. Practice that a few times. Doesn't go well the first time, P.S. But practice it. It doesn't mean stop, Using I statements is another excellent way of saying, kind of like not judging one another and saying, I don't believe that, but, and things like that, to make sure that everybody feels kind of like in a safe environment. And so those were just sort of briefly, a couple of strategies that I have. I have a whole toolbox of them because I really enjoyed lesson planning. But I want to offer, we don't have a ton of time, but maybe just a couple minutes if you have questions, comments. Anybody have anything they want to add to what we talked about this morning? You're an excellent audience. Go ahead.
That's Robert Kagan's source. What are his writings?
So his first one is The Evolving Self, and I think it's from the 80s. And that was his initial, I think this is my theory. And then he went into, and he's a Harvard psychologist. He's still around today. And he then decided to create the subject-object interview with Lisa Leahy is her name, if we're getting all that. And then that was The Mental Demands of Modern Life, I think is what the second one was called. So they put his psychological theory to the test and did all of these interviews for years, and then came out with a couple nuances to the original theory, and realized that there are levels of expectation in society that are kind of preventing people from developing towards level 4, because we're constantly expected to be and do somebody we're not ready to be and do. And now he goes into work, like job markets and stuff like that. So all of his work now is the language you use to talk to each other and how it's all developmental and things like that. So,
How does he spell his last name?
Keegan, Kegan, Robert Keegan. Go ahead.
In discussing the stages of development, does Keegan bring up self-esteem at all? Not so much like how people feel about themselves or how people like themselves, but how they identify, how they conceive, and how they behave. Mm-hmm. And are there any practical approaches to developing your conception of self within those stages? Mm-hmm. Because people won't develop through those stages if they conceive of themselves as not being capable.
Right, and that's in his second book on the expectations that we have lead to that self-depreciation. That you're never living up to expectations leads you to think you're not good enough to do anything. And so that's why he says know where people are on the journey so that you can support where they are, not where you think that they should be.
Not only could they be stuck, they could actually regress.
Oh, absolutely. And so he was a psychologist and dealt with patients. And so he also, in his first book, I think is when he starts referencing specific practices for kind of when people get stuck. And what happens is you can have a serious trauma and you're in a transition. So a child can be really regress and not develop. You can't skip stages, and so you can be level 2 and be 30. And you're usually getting mental help at that point because something terrible happened to you when you were in a transition, if it was a death of a parent very often, and so those without the right support structures and maybe a different approach to therapy, which, there's different approaches to that, so yeah.
What's that fellow text called?
Mental Demands of Modern Life. In Over Their Heads, that's the start of it, sorry. In Over Their Heads, The Mental Demands of Modern Life. Go ahead.
Just to build off what John said, if you teach long enough, like you said, kids will come back and touch base with you. And I used to struggle because I would think, of all the thousands of kids, what's your name again?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would think was, who were you the last time I saw you?
Yes.
And then I heard a brilliant homily by my former pastor about meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
And I stopped trying to remember who they were the last time I saw them.
Yep.
And it may be obvious to you, everyone, but to me it was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Listen to this person in front of you and find out what they need, where they're at right now, and be honest, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name.
Yeah.
And on some level, where are you at right now? And if necessary, how'd you get here?
Yeah.
And I stopped trying to worry about what they were like
Yeah.
4 years ago.
Your
10
memory of
years
them.
ago,
Right.
It freed me up from that anxiety.
Yeah.
And allowed me to be present to them as they were and not as they used to be.
Wonderful.
And it's a thing I'm trying to practice, and it makes
Wonderful.
a difference to me.
Yeah. And now you can think of it, if you choose to, you can think of it in terms of the questions that you can ask them.
Like
Where are you in your faith life? How's it going? Do you need anything?
Yep. The
Yeah,
mentoring
mentoring.
goes on and on and on.
Yes, absolutely, because they will contact you. Go ahead. I know, sorry. Last one.
In some stages of development, people throughout their life go back and forth between them. Does Kagan believe that too?
So his, yes.
You go back, like depending on what the day is or what you're dealing with at that time, you're functioning at a different.
It's not necessary. He says you don't really go back to an older stage, but you will reclaim parts of those. And so that's why these stages, level 3 is so important, because you will remember this when you come through that shipwreck. You know, like you will reclaim this, parts of this, as your own. And so that's his going back. And so his like model is a circle that goes like this, because you're going between what you know, what society, you know, like your social engagements, your own cognitive level. But you will reclaim your childhood in some way. Can we take one more? No? Ed wants me to go now.
Sorry. So sorry.
Well, thank you.